Hi. So, hi. I'm Aliti and I am a reloader. I'm a co-founder and board member of Reload Greece Foundation, and I would like to thank you all for joining us here today. I would like to take an extra moment to extend a particularly warm welcome to some of our most dedicated and committed members of our community, who are our mentors. They have dedicated an extremely huge amount of hours and energy and time to share their expertise with our members through our all educational programs. They're an integral part of them, and they have played a very key role in developing some of the startups that you'll get a chance to meet later on today. So it's really nice to have you here today as well. Thank you for being here. So next up, we'll be discussing about the path towards the creation of successful and sustainable entrepreneurial ecosystems. And moderating the panel discussion will be an ex-senior managing director at FTI Consulting, an author, commentator, and economist. So please, who's also actually a member of the Reload Greece family for over 3 years now, so it's very special for us to have you here as well. Please, without further ado, welcome on stage Vicky Price. Thank you.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here, and of course, most of you know that I am Greek, one of those people who came over at a very, very young age to make a new life here quite a long time ago. What I wanted to do right now is sort of start this next session. The way we're going to run it is that G.Innes, who I'll introduce in a second, is going to make a presentation, and then I will invite some people on the panel, and Gordon will join us as well, so that we can then hear a little bit more about experience from other places, and how they've actually dealt with this ecosystem of entrepreneurship that we're going to be talking about. Now, Gordon and I worked together in Whitehall for quite some time, shared our frustrations, some of the things that we were hearing just now about Greece itself or other places where the civil service perhaps feels at times where they can't really influence things. It's not unique to Greece, I have to say. It happens here as well, and it's particularly happening right now, of course, with Brexit. We were discussing just before, during the break, whether Brexit would be mentioned in this particular session, and I decided to do so now, so that at least we've broken this taboo, and there may be more of that as we go along. So Gordon is really rather interesting because now, of course, he is with Bloomberg Associates. Of course, Bloomberg himself has just said, I think, Michael Bloomberg, that Brexit was the stupidest thing that anyone has ever voted for. So I mentioned it twice already, so there we go. So Gordon was the inaugural chief executive of London & Partners before joining Bloomberg Associates, which was really the UK capital's official promotional and economic development company. And a lot has happened, of course, in London, and we're probably going to be touching on that in a little while anyway. Gordon has been doing work in a number of different cities, Athens being one of them. So, Gordon, over to you, if we can call you up to the podium, and if you can present for about 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll have the rest of the panel come over. Thank you very much, Gordon.
Thank you very much, Vicky. I think in addition to saying that about Brexit, Mike also said that electing Donald Trump was the equal stupidest thing that the country has done. So I'll leave it to you to decide which tips the scales the most. You may be wondering why I'm here speaking about at an Athens conference, at a Greek conference, speaking about entrepreneurial ecosystems when I'm working for Mike Bloomberg. As Vicky described my background, Mike set up, Mike obviously owns Bloomberg LP, the financial services company. He set up a foundation about 10 years ago. And one of the things that he's passionate about is effective cities, and in particular, cities' abilities to positively impact the quality of life of their citizens. He was the mayor of New York for 12 years. He brought a lot of that team with him, and he's subsequently recruited people who've played key roles in other cities around the world to join that team. So in addition to the philanthropic giving that the foundation obviously is the main reason for the foundation, there is also a team of experts that can work with mayors in cities around the world to help them to use that money effectively, but also to put in place the systems, the processes, the programs that they need, the capabilities that they need. I've been asked this morning to say a little bit about the entrepreneurial ecosystem, particularly obviously with a reference to Athens and some of the work that we're doing there, but I'll say a little bit, if I have time, also about the work I did in London with the Tech City initiative. And I think the first thing I wanted to do was to maybe do a little bit of myth busting. A lot of cities, a lot of mayors come to us thinking that if only they did this, they could kind of encourage entrepreneurship and start the startup community. And I like this quote from Brad Feld. Brad Feld is the founder of Techstars. He played a key role in supporting the growth of entrepreneurship in Boulder, Colorado. Those of you who don't know, Boulder has the densest per capita number of startups of any city in the world, even more than Tel Aviv. So in Boulder, there was no strategic plan. Government had little to do with it. There weren't committees wading in bureaucratic quicksand, wasting hundreds of hours of people's time, strategizing about how to create startups. And if you speak to some people, particularly from Silicon Valley, a good example before his fall from grace, Dave McClure, who created 500 startups, when asked what the secret sauce of his organization was in supporting entrepreneurship, his answer was, find smart people, give them money, and wait for good shit to happen. But there are, of course, organizations that are trying to be a bit more strategic in thinking through entrepreneurial ecosystems. KPMG has done a big piece of work recently. This is a survey they do every year, a couple of years, looking at why some cities are more successful than others in growing their startup ecosystem. I'm going to get so Tim Zanni, who organized this survey, who runs it, I'm just going to a minute from him to explain what this year's findings were. We can hopefully play the video.
Can build innovative centers, and our survey, of course, would suggest that Shanghai, New York, Tokyo, Beijing, and London are leading the way. And they lead the way because they have incredibly smart people who are being trained in incredibly great research-based universities. There's a pro-risk culture that's being created in these innovation centers. I was in London a couple of weeks ago meeting with a startup company, 12 incredibly smart software engineers who have created a great product. Now, if it fails, what have they lost? They can pick up and start something different, go in a different direction, and they probably will have learned from that. And then most importantly, that innovation-seeking capital is heading in the direction of these tech hubs looking for the next best thing.
So an organization in the States, Startup America, some of you may know, has identified a number of areas which are important for underpinning some of the key ecosystems from the Valley to Kendall Square in Massachusetts, to other cities around the US. And these are not rocket science, but they're really important about how they fit together to build and support the ecosystem. The role of entrepreneurs, being a leader, the role of mentors, being absolutely critical to support startups, the role of networks and events in order to fuel those networks, a supportive government, as Tim talked about, a deep talent pool, and then some of the wider support, professional support services, the role that large companies can play in bringing their assets, and the role, obviously, of finance. I'll say a little bit about a couple of these before I move on to the example of Athens. But I think it's really important, before we talk about a couple of these, to talk about some of the underpinning policies, some of the plumbing which cities have to put in place in order to be able to then for companies to be supported within the ecosystem. So policies around talent, policies around the business environment, the tax treatment, having the physical space, the property, the flexible, affordable workspace, the infrastructure, obviously broadband infrastructure being critical for tech companies, access to data, and then linked to talent, favourable immigration and visa policies. And these are all areas that when we worked on the Tech City Initiative in London from 2010 until now, that policies were put in place by the last coalition government and by the mayor in London. So introducing mandatory coding in schools in the UK, reforming the SEIS and EIS tax breaks to make them more favourable, doing a lot of work around affordable workspace and more flexible leases for move-on space. The Mayor's connectivity rating scheme, broadband is still an issue in areas of central London, but introducing that rating scheme to try and encourage the private sector to improve the speed and delivery of broadband. Obviously, the London Data Store, the Open Data Institute, the UK is now a world leader in government open data. And things like the Entrepreneur's Visa, the Exceptional Talent Visa, were all key things that we put in place in London to support the growth of the ecosystem here. And I think what's really important, and I won't go into depth in all of these, that there are leaders and feeders, and it's something that Bradfeld talks about in his book and his experience in Boulder. Many people think that the government, in this case the mayor, should be the leader, but his conclusion is that government can only ever be a feeder to the ecosystem. The leadership has to come from a critical mass of entrepreneurs who are evangelists, who have a long-term commitment to the city. So the role of an organisation like Reload Greece is absolutely critical to the success of the cluster. The government can, however, be an important feeder. It can galvanise, it can stimulate agendas, it can use its bully pulpit, it can develop programmes, it can obviously change policies. Universities, here in a great university today, also have a key role to play, contributing students, professors, KIT, entrepreneur programs, tech transfer centres. Investors can also play a key role. Unfortunately, investors often don't, but they can play an absolutely critical role in supporting and nurturing the startup community. But I think one of the things that is critical is the role of mentorship. The programs that we set up in London for startups, particularly helping startups to scale up, are all based on mentorship and the idea of communities giving back to the next generation. And I think you see that in every successful ecosystem around the world, that role of mentorship. Service providers, large corporates also play a role, as do, as I said earlier, the role of networks. Networks are a really important part of the ecosystem, and they help to explain why some cities go from very little, a very small ecosystem and scale up and accelerate very rapidly, as we saw in New York under Mike Bloomberg, as we saw in London over the last 7, 8, 9 years. They create a sense of community, they provide exchange of information, they create that serendipity that's so important in bringing people together. And there are many, many examples of networks that exist, including in Athens, some of the incubators, some of the accelerator programs that exist there. International outreach, again, it's an area that was critical, the work that I did in London. If you think about successful ecosystems, they have an international reputation, whether it's Tel Aviv, whether it's Boston, Cambridge, Massachusetts. And they benefit from those network effects, which come from that international outreach and the international collaboration. And I think one of the things that many governments do, which is very wrong, is they see other ecosystems in neighbouring cities as competitors. We were in Paris this week. There was a team and delegation coming across with Mayor Khan to meet with Mayor Hidalgo for entrepreneurs to cross-fertilise and learn from each other. And I think having those porous boundaries where ecosystems can work together and collaborate is really critical, that they're not competitors, that they are collaborators. And again, the role that London can play with Athens, Athens can play with London, is a really exciting one. Moving on then to Athens, just to really give a snapshot of some of the work that we've been doing over the last couple of years with Mayor G.Innes, putting in place some of the plumbing, but also then building some of the programs and the capabilities within the ecosystem. The Mayor Mayor G.Innes asked Mike if he would provide some assistance to the city back in 2015. And we've been working across a number of disciplines, not just business development, entrepreneurship, but transportation, social services, tourism, sustainability, the cultural world. But the focus has very much been on the building blocks of entrepreneurship within the city. We've put in place some key structures, so something called the Athens Partnership. For those of you from the States, it's a new venture fund, a 501c3 fund, which basically allows philanthropic donations to be given for the city, but in a way that they know it will be used effectively, and it has the support and backing of Bloomberg, so it doesn't go through the government channels where it gets diluted to pet projects or for other activities, but very much with the backing of the mayor. We have supported infrastructure projects, so refurbishing some of the public schools, but also opening them up in the evenings so that they're available for further education and for learning for local communities. We've done some work in the commercial triangle. These pictures at the bottom shows some of the work that's been done to try and enhance some of the public spaces and give it back to the city in the historic centre of Athens. But also some of the work we're doing at the moment to bring entrepreneurs back in, some creative individuals, some artists and startups to come and utilise some of the empty shops that are in those areas of the city. We've been working on the tourism side to position Athens as a city break destination. Tourism is largely very small startup companies. And so it's a way of creating entry-level jobs, but also very large numbers of jobs. I mentioned the culture programs. We helped create the Athens Culture Net. And Athens, I think, has just been, I think I'm right, is named or is about to be named or hopefully will be named European City of Culture. We've done some work on the social services side, so setting up the iServe database to improve social service delivery, to get people into work training. Also the iCare program, which is a management system particularly focused on the refugees coming into the city to get them documented and get them into the system. And a lot of work on the digital space. So the gentleman you see, some of you will probably know, Konstantinos Habides. I hope I've pronounced him correctly. So an engineer who's just recently been appointed Athens' first ever Chief Digital Officer. So this is a role that was created originally in New York. It was the first time it had been done. We've just appointed one here in London, again with the support of Bloomberg. And Konstantinos was appointed in Athens earlier this year. So he is responsible for the coordination of the city's digital strategy, engaging with the stakeholders, the businesses, the universities, looking at open data, better services for communities, better opportunities for startups. He's supported now by the Athens Digital Council, which is the largest digital companies, tech companies in Athens, from Accenture, IBM, Microsoft, Wind, Nokia, etc. And just last week, there was an early announcement about the new digital lab, which will be based in the Serafeo Sports Complex. And the idea of the digital lab, which is being supported initially by Nokia, is that Konstantinos will identify some of the key challenges that the city is facing around cleanliness, parking, space management, vehicle fleet management issues. Nokia will provide the buildings, will provide the kit, will provide the mentors, and then together they will choose the entrepreneurs who have got the ideas to solve some of these problems. So this should be a win-win-win, hopefully, for the city. The city will get the solution for free. Nokia will get the solution to be able to sell through their global network in other countries, and the entrepreneurs will be able to realise their ideas and to create businesses out of them. If I have time, I'm going to make you all feel homesick. I mentioned some of the work that we're doing around tourism. This is a very, very short, it's a 60-second video that we produced, particularly for social media, but it went out through mainstream media as well to the French and German audiences, explaining why Athens now is such a great destination for people to look at and visit for a weekend. So, Athens in 60 seconds. And one of the nice things about that campaign, it's the first time that Athens has ever run a B2C tourism campaign. And it was entirely funded through the Hellenic Initiative, G.Innes, and the airport. No Bloomberg money, no city money that went into that program. So it's a great example of working, collaboration, leaders and feeders working together. Very, very briefly, if I have a couple of minutes, just to say a little bit about the work I did in London. So, as Vicky said, I was the chief exec of London and Partners from 2011 to early beginning of this year. A lot of that work was around supporting the growth of the tech cluster, the so-called Tech City initiative. I'm sure many of you will know back in 2010, the vision was laid out by the Prime Minister and then Mayor that London should become the best place in the world to imagine, create and scale up a tech business. And so a number of organisations, including mine, were created. We were a private sector organisation, but partly privately funded, partly publicly funded. And there was a whole series of new initiatives that were rolled out across the city, and I won't go into detail on those, but all the areas that we touched on earlier that were critical to a tech ecosystem. So quarterly meetings with the Prime Minister's team at number 10, introducing new exceptional talent visas, the Digital Business Academy, introducing networks to encourage high net worth individuals to become angel investors off the back of the SEIS tax credit. Some of the infrastructure work that we did around new flexible leases, particularly around the Shoreditch and Stratford areas, and the work that we did with international outreach. So, for example, creating London Tech Week, which went on after a year to become Europe's largest tech festival. A lot of that work was about thinking creatively how we could work with the private sector to tell that story to the world. So bringing in the best possible students, helping startups to become scale-ups and to grow and internationalize, bringing in mentors from Silicon Valley and from the United States, positioning the city as a global hub, for example, for Indian startups, and running wider rich media campaigns. In each case, these programs were primarily funded through the private sector, so aligning the interests that we had with our private sector partner interests. And what's happened, I have to put a picture of my boss up in every slide presentation. What's happened over that time is that London, the tech startup ecosystem has grown at twice the speed of the wider London economy. It's now, and this is probably out of date, has 40,000 digital businesses employing 200,000 people. It's the fourth largest ecosystem in the world with a value of around 44 billion. It ranks #1 in fintech. It ranks equal for big data. It's the #1 city in Europe for scale-ups, and it's home to more than half of Europe's so-called unicorns, billion-dollar companies. So Vicky started with Brexit. I will end with Brexit. Let's hope that in 10 years' time we can still say that about this city. So.